what I'll do is I might sit in your chair. And as you can tell, I don't care about this bit, so let you get comfortable with what you want to say or do. You got your cup of tea?
Oh yeah, I've got my cup of tea over here.
That's very, very red.
It's very, very herbal.
It's a berry.
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed berry thing.
Jesus. All right, don't look at me.
A little disconcerting.
Actually, just pretend I am sitting there, and I'll see how that looks.
Yeah. Is it too far off camera?
Just a tad, yeah.
Yes, I really want to be looking kind of over there.
How about
Oh, you park yourself there.
I'll park myself here. Now look at me there.
Yeah, and that's better if I'm looking. If I'm talking to you.
That's better.
That's a
Easier, more comfortable.
better angle. Yeah.
Alrighty. I suppose just to get this kicked off, it's basically, we might ask the same thing we asked Chris and sort of go, how do you see community-led planning or community safety groups in the greater community, the SES context?
Okay, well I think the first thing that comes out of all of this is when you start thinking about the nature of the communities in the west of the state, which is our concern. Here in the Murray region, we have a lot of wide open space here. We have a lot of widely separated populations spread thinly across large geographic areas. So I think the question is, if you approach it from the SES perspective as a response agency, are we actually able to do what we need to do to keep those communities safe? When you start to analyse that, and you look at the map and you look at who we've got in terms of the population and in terms of the SES units that serve those populations, the answer is clearly no. As a response agency, the SES is never going to be able to do everything we need to do in order to keep those communities safe. So with that idea in mind, the only sensible thing, the only sensible way forward for us is to engage with those communities and to build on the resilience which is natural to them in this part of the world. They are pretty resilient people. What they need from us is a bit of leadership and a lot of information to enable them to look after themselves, to keep themselves safe. So that's the way of the future as I see it.
How do you see the cost benefits to the SES?
In order to invest in this kind of thing, the actual expense is not that great. It's actually cheaper for us to engage with communities and encourage the development of their own resilience than it is to try and build a response capability to keep them out of trouble ourselves. So in terms of an investment, it's a very wise one, and it's also one in which we get a great deal of value for money. So I think from that perspective, purely financial perspective, it makes a great deal of sense as well.
That's pretty good actually.
Yeah, if you talk about the nature of the communities in the west of the state, they're by and large farmers. They're people that have been here for a while. They know what happens in their local areas. They know the threats that they face in terms of the floods and all of that kind of thing that may impact on them. They also know what to do about those things. Often you'll find there's quite a difference between the SES in this part of the world compared to what we're used to in metropolitan areas. The people over here, something happens, they'll just deal with it, and the SES will generally not get a call. They don't actually need us to come and help them. What they need from us is information, and they need leadership, because if we can coordinate what a community's doing, they can keep themselves out of trouble, and they can look after themselves. They can make sure that vulnerable people in their communities, and there certainly are some of those, are actually looked after. They can do that themselves. They don't need us to be rushing in there, the superhero in orange, to actually get them out of trouble.
Right. It's easy to cut, that's all. What I'm thinking about now is East versus West. You just started on it then, but maybe say, how do you see this applicable on the East Coast, Narrabeen, or whatever it's going to be? Just that context.
Yeah, okay. I think when it comes to engaging with communities, there are differences between the east of the state and the west. Nevertheless, along the coast there are certainly communities that exist there, and a lot of places you'll go, you'll find the same sort of community spirit that you do in the west of the state. It's a little more concentrated perhaps, and there are a few more people around who don't buy into it, but by and large the core of it is there. So I think some of the principles that we're talking about here in the east of the state, in the west of the state rather, could be applied to the east coast. Probably not in exactly the same way. We'd have to work out different ways of approaching it, but certainly the same principles could apply. I'm thinking particularly here in terms of the flooding scenarios that we often see along the east coast, particularly the north coast of New South Wales, and also tsunami, which is where a community is going to have to be heavily self-reliant, because we just aren't going to be able to do everything we need to do to keep people out of trouble in a land-based tsunami type scenario.
Localism. The people to make the best decisions are normally the people who live there. Can I talk to something around about that?
Yeah, certainly. I can speak from experience of the west of the state, that people in this part of the world, the communities in this part of the world, do not like being dictated to by outsiders. It doesn't go down well. The other thing is that because they know their local hazards and they know what happens in their part of the world, in a flood particularly, they actually don't need to be directed to do things. They know what needs to be done and when it needs to be done. All they need from us is a bit of support and a bit of information, particularly on gauge heights and particularly on the expected weather, all of that kind of thing. We keep them up to date with that kind of information on what is likely to happen, when it's likely to happen. They can make their own decisions about what they need to do in response to that, whether they need to evacuate or not, whether they need roads closed, that sort of thing. They can make their own call on that. I could talk particularly about the experience of issuing evacuation orders. The best people to make that decision are the local community. Given enough information and their own experience on how the flood behaves in their part of the world, they can make their decision that they think an evacuation order is necessary. They can then communicate that back to the State Emergency Service, who can make the order. Whoever is going to comply with that order, I mean, we don't know. The communities can take care of that themselves. But having an evacuation order in place does give them some real backup when it comes to the after event dealing with their insurance companies and things like that. Far better for us to have that two-way dialogue with the community and to be issuing orders and warnings and things in concert with them, so that we know that they really have bought into that, rather than initiate an order which they don't know anything about, don't believe in, and probably will result in confrontation, which is not productive for anybody.
In the future, do you see that these community-led planning initiatives will probably be rolled out statewide, and you can see it as a benefit as a statewide thing, not just the Murray region?
I think in the west of the state, it's the only way that makes sense. If you're talking about trying to keep your very diverse and very spread out communities safe in the face of the hazards that they face. Along the east coast, it makes a great deal of sense, particularly from the point of view of the nightmare scenario, the tsunami, where it doesn't matter how many resources we throw at it, we're never going to be able to deal with everything that needs to be dealt with in a situation like that. And I think also in some of the areas along the east coast which are subject to flooding on a regular basis, those sorts of areas there, it makes a great deal of sense. Now, I'm not entirely sure on the value of it in densely populated metropolitan areas. Whether it would work there or not, I don't know. Can't say, haven't tried it. But certainly for a good 3/4 of the state, it seems to me that it is the way of the future, because it's the only way that really makes sense, both practically and economically.
What else do you think we should talk about?
Well, what have we talked about over the last couple of weeks? I mean, we've been talking about community-led planning, the creation of community safety groups. I think we talked about the idea of a community safety group being an all hazards thing. It's not necessarily just floods or just fires. It's got to involve all of those things.
All right. Well, how about we talk then about, well, community-led planning now. We can actually talk about a community safety group.
Yeah.
So you can see that the SES could actually be looking at a new type of volunteer, the occasional volunteer, to cover it all. Maybe this is the time I can introduce it in the film, the concept of the community safety group, and sort of go, the idea of it, well, let's look at a community-led plan and take it one step further and talk about a community safety group.
Yeah.
It could be.
Which is often what you find anyway, because where there is towns like Urana, where we have an SES unit, we have an RFS brigade, they're all the same people. The nature of the emergency determines the colour of the overalls that they're wearing, and that's pretty much it. So that's the basis for what you're talking about. There will always be a few active individuals in those communities who want to get involved, who actually do good stuff to assist.
But they're always going to be the
community
responders.
members. They're the responders, yes.
But
And they lead the community. They lead everyone else who actually isn't quite so active.
But what about a community safety group though? Because what we're talking about here are people who probably aren't going to have that type of buy-in. We're talking about a vested interest now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, looking after their own. Yeah.
So how would you introduce that to another region controller?
The idea of a community safety group. I think I'll be talking about those individuals in the town, in the community, who naturally do take the lead when something happens, and there's always at least one. Those are the people who everyone looks to. They know pretty much what's going to happen, but they also know that running off holes, bolus, a little bit here, a little bit there, so I'll do this, maybe he's doing some of that, and maybe he's got a bulldozer, I don't know, maybe there's a few other bits. If it's coordinated, you get a much better bang for your buck. You get a much better outcome at the end of the day, and it's always those one or two people in the community that people look to for that leadership to bring it all together, to coordinate what's going on. So I think that that's the basis of your community safety group. Those are the people that when you go into the community and you say, we want to do some planning here with you guys about what's going to happen in this community, they're the ones that will go, oh yeah, that's a great idea, and they'll get on board and they'll lead it, and they'll encourage other people to join in with it. And you've seen that in a couple of places where we've actually kicked these things off. So I think they're the nucleus of your community safety group. The group itself will have variable membership. Some of them will be more keen, more active, more involved in it on a day-by-day basis. Others will be more like associates that pop in from time to time, usually when there's a threat of something actually happening. So the size of the group it's likely to be a little nebulous. But I think that's the way of it in these communities. It's really the people looking after themselves, looking after their own, rather than thinking anywhere further afield, and that's fine. They're going to do that anyway, so we need to be a part of it.
How do you see us sort of supporting a community safety group? What can we do apart from, like, we'll just quickly talk about, like, you go and we set up, we establish the fact that they create their own plan, and then we're looking at the caches of equipment. So if you're going to say, you're talking this to another person, what would you say? Well, in my mind, from start to finish, and because in Quinty we know that we went in, we talked, we communicated, we exercised, and we went out and we already got some equipment in there, but my goal is to have like a little bit better. If you were explaining this at a region controls conference, what would you say?
In terms of supporting a community?
No, what would you think? Well, you're standing up in support to talk about a community safety group, to introduce a concept to it. What would you say?
Okay. First thing you need is the people. Once you've got that and you've got their buy-in, you've got them enthusiastic, and you probably don't have to do very much work in order to get them to that point, because they already know that they need this. The first thing is facilitation. It's not about going in there and telling them how to do this stuff. They already know it. It's about keeping them on track, keeping their discussions in the way that, going in the direction that they need to go in. It's a facilitation role, not anything else. That's the first thing. Once the group is up and running and they're working on their plans, then there's information that we can provide to them. Obvious stuff is the kind of thing that comes from flood studies and that kind of thing. We can inform them there so that they can make much better decisions about what goes into their plan and what actions they're going to take in response to events unfolding. So again, there it's a kind of a facilitation, it's information, it's a bit of guidance. Once they've got their plan, it needs to be documented. Well, again, we can assist them with that, getting it documented in a format which is usable to everybody, and we can base that on the experience that we've had other places. We know what works. So we can save them a lot of time, and we can save them making mistakes. So all the way through, we're kind of assisting, we're facilitating, we're providing information, we're giving a bit of clerical assistance perhaps, that sort of thing. But the idea is the content of the plan, the actions they're going to take is all coming from them. That's the key. It's not our plan, it's theirs. So once that's up and running, what do they need in actually enacting what's in their plan? Well, not a lot is usually the answer to that. They don't actually need very much because most of the resources they require, they've already got. It helps if they've got some clearly identifiable means of actually saying, oh yeah, this guy's one of the leaders here in the community. If we see him, we know that we'll listen to what he says. Well, give him a tabard, give him a baseball cap, something like that. Something that clearly identifies them as the people that know in that community. So they can be seen from a way off, and, oh yeah, there he is, that's Freddie, we know about him, we know that he knows what has to be done here, he's coordinating, we'll go to him. They need some communications perhaps, maybe some handheld CB radios or something like that, so they can talk to each other. Quite likely they've already got them, so again, it's not a huge investment to actually make that stuff happen. Then they're going to need the obvious stuff, a stash of sandbags perhaps, some equipment, bits and pieces, shovels, the sorts of things that are there already, but let's have it put in a central location so that everyone knows where it is when they need it. Again, it's not a huge investment really to get that stuff happening. Now if you put that into say a half-size shipping container,